Let's turn from problems intrinsic to the logic model to problems that may occur when you actually try to implement it in the real world, in your community. So first of all, what problems could occur within the organization? Every organization has its own internal dynamics. And as an organization undertakes a completely new strategy, especially if this is a new organization, it's untested how well it's going to do, not just in terms of implementing the strategy, but how well people will work well together. That's just something that every CEO needs to be cognizant of, and it's something that I'm sure all of you have encountered and worked to overcome in your own organizations. Secondly, everything may go fine within the organization, and you may be implementing your logic model just according to plan, but there are external social or environmental factors or economic factors that affect your success. So imagine that you begin implementing the strategy for homelessness in 2008, and how much of the strategy depends on the state of the economy, which then goes downhill very rapidly for the next several years, through no control of your own and not even something you could have predicted. And now let's take a look at stakeholders who might impede the implementation of the strategy. In the first class, we made a list of many of the stakeholders concerned with homelessness. Here, let me just mention a few of them. Taxpayers who are concerned about efficient use of their tax money, home builders and homeowners who are concerned about property values, law enforcement who are concerned about rates of crime, employers who are concerned about the workforce and also concerned about having customers have a safe path to their door. So having reviewed some stakeholders, let's take a look at how stakeholders might impede different interventions. If it calls for having drop-off places or clinics on the street or temporary shelters, you could well imagine residents or businesses not being happy with having congregations of homelessness on the street. If it calls for needle exchanges to reduce drug addiction, there may be law enforcement officers who regard that as fostering rather than trying to prevent illegal drug use. Turning to permanent supportive housing, many residents would not wish to have permanent supportive housing for homeless people, many of whom do have drug and mental health problems in their neighborhoods. It's a classic NIMBY, not in my backyard problem, but it's one that's pervasive. And turning to the strategy for preventing homelessness, you can imagine many landlords objecting to strategies to keep people in their houses when they are not paying rent, or to use legal tactics to keep them from being evicted. One way of anticipating problems with implementation, as well as problems in the logic model, is to do what some people have called a pre-mortem. Imagine that the strategy has failed, and you then have to think of every possible reason why it may have failed. In effect, you have to use the equivalent of how might we's to say, how might it have failed? And when you've thought of everything possible and thought about how to mitigate that, you at least have a good shot of avoiding some ways in which it might fail. We spent this class looking at weaknesses in logic models and difficulties of implementing the homeless strategy. Your assignment for next week is going to be to look for weaknesses in your own logic models and problems with implementation. Your assignment for the next class will be take any one of the 3 logic models we've been exploring for childhood obesity and describe your level of confidence that the activities and outputs in that logic model will lead to intermediate outcomes, and that the intermediate outcomes will lead to the ultimate outcomes of reducing childhood obesity. Where do you see problems? What makes you confident or not? And then I'd like you to describe stakeholders who might impede implementation of your program and other possible problems that you see with implementation. How might you address those problems? Our next class on homelessness is going to have 2 parts. In the first part, we're going to look at targets and metrics for assessing progress and whether you've achieved your outcomes in homelessness strategies. And then we're going to introduce the complex problem of evaluation, how you actually know whether your organization made a difference in achieving outcomes to better the life of homeless people.